All right. Thank you for joining me at Podomatic. Let me go live on TikTok. Thank you for joining me at TikTok, Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. And I've got actually 3 interviews scheduled today. So it's going to be an interesting, wonderful day of broadcasting right here in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome to the program to all of our live streaming subscribers. My guest coming up shortly, hopefully, is Jennifer Kearns. She is the host of the new nationally syndicated show All American Radio with Jennifer Kearns. She has served as a GOP strategist, spokeswoman for the California Republican Party, strategist for the Colorado recalls over the Second Amendment, and writer-researcher for the most watched U.S. presidential debate of the 2016 election cycle for Fox News. And here she is. So that's what's on the agenda. Jennifer Kearns is with us. And again, Jennifer is the host of the new nationally syndicated show All American Radio. Jennifer, thanks for joining me.
Hey, great to be with you.
All right. And let's get some visual here. I see an MSNBC graphic. there we go. Thanks a lot. So, Jennifer, here we are. As recently as 2 weeks ago, Fox News, which is a left-leaning media outlet, did a poll which indicates that a majority of Republicans did not believe that Joe Biden should have been sworn in, and that they still believe that there are questions about the election. Now, just for my YouTube followers here, I'm not saying that because I know YouTube is taking us down. I'm quoting from a Vox News poll. This isn't me, so we don't want to get into specifics here, or else we're going to get, they'll unplug me. But I guess I want to ask you, Jennifer, as somebody who's been on the front lines of Republican politics, 2 weeks into this administration with all of their executive orders, and we should look at those. Where do Republicans stand in terms of moving forward? Do we have any kind of unified agenda? Do we have any particular principles that we want to bring to the fore?
Well, look, it's not just Republicans who are polling in this nature. And again, this is not us saying this. These are the pollsters getting the temperature of the American people out there. Joe Biden actually has a significant problem with independent voters. An NBC News poll, which is no conservative rag, that's a left-leaning news organization by far. NBC News came out with a poll on his inauguration day that said 1/3 of independents don't believe that he was fairly elected. So I thought that was quite interesting. It shows that Joe Biden really has a significant problem here, not just with Republicans, but 1/3 of independents in America. That is significant because Joe Biden has built this, this narrative for the last 4 decades that he's sort of this independent guy on Capitol Hill. He knows how to work with all these different groups. And that's actually not true. And I think that's why we're seeing so many executive orders. We've seen nearly 50 in just his first, 10 days in office. That's more than the past 5 presidents combined. And I think that's really why you're seeing this. I think the poll numbers show that Joe Biden doesn't really quite have the support that he's pretending to have, or that the mainstream media is pretending that he has.
Right. I mean, he's being given the softball treatment by the mainstream media, almost the hero worship type of treatment that certainly Barack Obama received for his 8 years. And just of these, it's incredible, the bouquets that are tossed at him. Whereas with Trump, it was knives out from day one. I mean, the minute he stepped off the escalator.
It was grenades.
Oh, yeah, you bet. and worse. I mean, they were conspiring to have him taken out of office. But he has all of these executive orders sitting on his desk the minute he walks into the Oval Office, obviously pre-written for him by somebody, some special interest group. It's who knows if he even read them. In fact, I don't think there was recently a hot mic which caught him literally saying, "I don't know what's in this." He says to I think Kamala Harris, and she says, "Well, just sign it." And so And some of these executive orders are not friendly to large segments of the population in this country, particularly people who were contracted to work on the XL pipeline. Now that's sitting there collecting moss, while I think it's 11,000 people were given expiration notices. They no longer have jobs, plus same thing in Canada. Who was behind that? Why would they have done that?
Well, look, the Democrats have made it very clear, especially the progressive wing of the party, that they're not fans of the Keystone Pipeline. You know, when the pipeline was being built, we saw members of the Democratic Party chain themselves to pieces of the pipeline. Here's the great irony, though. The joke is on them, because the same oil is going to be shipped down from Canada. It's just going to happen on trucks now and probably cause more pollution.
Right.
So they're sort of biting themselves in the foot. But look, this Keystone cancellation was more of the dog and pony show, you know, to show that we're rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. To shove it in Kristi Noem's face. You know, they don't like her. They think she's the new Michelle Bachmann of the Republican Party. Up there, you know, as she's created jobs and
Governor of South Dakota,
conservative.
Yep,
absolutely. So it was really more about sort of getting revenge on the people who've risen through the ranks of the Republican Party over the last 4 years, and that's really, I think, what most of the executive orders is trying to erase the 4 years of the Trump era. And frankly, to erase many of the good policy positions that President Trump enacted. Look, people may not have liked President Trump, but his policies were so good for Americans across the board. One of the executive orders, in fact, that I thought was most damaging that Joe Biden signed last week was one that gives the American power grid over to the Chinese. You look at President Trump back in May 1st of 2020, last year, actually signed his own executive order that said, you know, there are some vulnerabilities to the American power grid. We should not allow foreign countries contracts to work on the American power grid. We also should not allow foreign countries to manufacture equipment that then gets placed into sections of the American power grid. It was called like the American Power Protection Act. Well, Joe Biden, in a little-known section 7C of the order to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, actually says we can open up the American power grid even to foreign countries, and even foreign countries that may seek to do us harm.
Why would he do this? I mean, this is especially in light of, you know, let's call them accusations that the Biden family benefited financially from dealings in communist China, going all the way back to when he was a vice president and senator. I mean, there's this general perception that he's going to be in the pocket of the communist Chinese. So, I mean, this kind of goes to evidence of that, at least.
I mean, it really does. Look, remember Joe Biden back at one of the debates against President Trump said that unlike the Trump family, not a penny was the phrase used, will be given to the Biden family through some of these business transactions and international transactions. The fact of the matter is, as of this morning, Charlie, Hunter Biden still sits on the board of a Chinese company that still gives him 10% holdings. And that has not been done away with. There's been no declaration that Hunter Biden has distanced himself from that. And so I think that's what this is about, is giving access to their friends in the Chinese Communist Party to say, hey, America is reopened for business. It doesn't matter if it's a level playing field or not. If you're the Chinese Communist Party, you can come in and tinker around and play with the American power grid.
You know, I was about to give him the benefit of the doubt by noting that during the debate he used a future tense, you know, that we will not be, not to talk about what they've already done. But apparently they still are doing it. And, you know, it's kind of like the old Latin term, quid pro quo. The Paris Climate Agreement doesn't do a single thing to pull a single particle of carbon out of the atmosphere. All it does, and mainly because Russia, China, and I don't think Brazil or India are members of it, and those are the biggest polluters in the world, all it does is put shackles on the American economy and that of the Western democracies in a way as a gift to China and Russia. And it also, like the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline, it's going to raise the cost of oil. It's going to create another energy imbalance in the United States. One of the accomplishments of the Trump administration by any objective metric was that for the first time since, I think, World War II, the United States was energy independent. We were not dependent on a foreign power. Now we're going back to the days of dependence on a foreign power and a rise in the cost of oil, which is going to hurt working people across this country.
Yeah, I agree with you. And in fact, one of the things that President Trump did not get credit for is he actually helped other countries, as well as the United States, become energy independent. And I know not a lot of people talk about Poland, but that's a country that was very dependent on Russian oil, and it was helping Russia fund their military, because Poland, in the dark of winter, would need oil, and Russia would jack that price up. And President Trump went over there. He did a couple of trips over there and committed that they would find alternative energy sources and alternative oil sources. And sure enough, he did. Now, part of that, I think, he wanted to win that re-election vote in Pennsylvania, the heavy, Polish population. I think there was some campaign strategy to that. But for President Trump, who got accused of being in bed with Russia for 4 years, this is a guy who actually created sanctions that actually hurt Russia, both on the energy front and financial front, and also on their military front, because those industries are what funds Russia's military. So, he not only helped the United States of America become independent, but he helped other countries too. It's like that phrase, a strong person stands up for themselves, a stronger person stands up for everybody else. The world, I think, has lost that now. You look at Joe Biden. Really? I think the big favor here, obviously, is going to go to China over the next 4 years.
Right, and also the European countries are now going to again be a little bit more dependent on Russia, and which benefits them. President, I think that I don't know if Joe Biden himself said this, but it was said by a person close to him at the time that he was inaugurated, that he would dismantle the America First system, which is not good news for this country or for the world. It kind of sends a signal that we're moving back to the bad old days of perpetual war and international entanglements and world order, if you will. And that sure enough, there is now evidence that almost on the first day in office, the Biden administration is ramping up American military presence in Iraq and has now sent troops to Syria. I don't know about Afghanistan, but the fact is that Donald Trump was a peace president. There were no wars during his administration. He was de-escalating war around the world, supporting not only American strength, but the strength of all sovereign nations. And, it was this used to be a great cause of the left. Remember, the Marvin Gaye song, Brother, Brother, we don't want to escalate. War is not the answer. Only love can conquer hate. I mean, that's the theme of the Trump administration. And now we're going back to the old days of perpetual wars around the world. I mean, it just, I don't know if people understand why this is not a good thing, but, there doesn't seem to be much opposition to it.
Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, think back at the UC Berkeley ladies, the Trump presidency should have been their dream from a standpoint of, not sending troops overseas, not putting American young men and women in harm's way. And yet President Trump did exactly that. And he wasn't just not celebrated, he was demonized. And so that is really, really just puzzling to me. It does go to show just how power hungry the Democrats are and how power hungry they became, because there used to be this class of Democrats, right, that believed in common sense, that believed in fairness, and if they saw evidence before their eyes of something that they normally would like, they would say so. But in today's Democratic Party, that sort of dissent and healthy disagreement is just not allowed. You see that a lot, too, I think, showing up in Biden's executive orders. There's a reason that he had to push through so many executive orders. You would think that a guy who's the head of a party that just kept control of the House and just won control of the U.S. Senate, largely, would have plenty of support on Capitol Hill to push through these various policy proposals. But the fact that he didn't tells me he's ramming these through because he's got to return some favors to the left flank of his party. And that's the AOC caucus. That's the Bernie Sanders wing of his party. Those are people who have very little patience, and we're going to give him very little time to deliver on his promises. And we know the one thing about Washington, D.C., is that payback is expected, and that payment is expected upon arrival. And I think that's what you see with those dozens and dozens of executive orders to please AOC and the left wing of the party.
Right, and that's maybe why everyone is being so quiet right now. Okay, my guest is Jennifer Kern. She's the host of the new nationally syndicated show, All American Radio with Jennifer Kearns. So, Jennifer, two other executive orders that he signed could have very potentially damaging side effects. The first one is that he has put a halt to completing the wall along the Mexican border. And the second is he has signed something that apparently results in a faster pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. And I think the result of that is that, from what I understand, there's large caravans forming. Now, one of the elements of President Trump's program, along with building the wall, and they were very close to finishing it, was that there were embassies set up, sort of halfway houses set up in Mexico and in Central American countries that would process visa applicants in those countries so that people wouldn't have to swarm the border and try to get in and then get it processed. And I understand that that's being dismantled. Now you have caravans forming, and it's just potentially a human rights disaster if we're going to have thousands of people, including children, trying to cross the border. I mean, this is why Barack Obama built those cages. I'm not supporting that, but he did. And, there are going to be, not to mention the fact that, in this time of coronavirus pandemic, we don't know if they're properly screened, if they have masks, if they've been vaccinated. Probably not. Probably none of the above. So what do you see with regard to those two executive orders?
Well, look, this is, again, the hypocrisy of the left. What we've seen all across the country over the last 10 months, especially in those large cities, blue cities, New York City, some of these liberal jurisdictions, we've seen a bunch of Karens, right? You got to wear a mask. You can't get away from it. We see the videos of people throwing a fit in the store
having a meltdown, right?
To them.
I've seen that.
having a meltdown. Yet they'll allow 14,000 people or 65,000 people to come through the southern border who are coming from areas where the healthcare is subpar. The healthcare is in a third world country. They probably don't even have a basic annual checkup, let alone, as you said, a COVID screening, a piece of paper that Democrats say you have to get on a plane. You have to show your negative COVID test for Andrew Cuomo, but they'll let people come through the southern border just with no proof, no vaccine. This is really the double standard. And I think the American people who are independent-minded, I do think there are still a great deal of Americans who are independent-minded. Again, that 1/3 who don't have faith in Joe Biden, who don't think he was duly elected. I think there are still independent people out there who see this for the partisanship and just the blatant partisanship that it is, that you would not love your neighbor here in the United States and let your neighbor close to you and reopen schools and reopen businesses, yet you'll just let people come through the southern border. I think people see through that.
I hope so. I mean, not to mention that last summer, of course, you had the peaceful protesters which looted black businesses and burned black neighborhoods and murdered black people. in a swath across major cities in this country, they were also given a pass by the media when it came to wearing masks. Now, two other executive orders indicate...
A million of them, by the way. A million of them on June 1st and 2nd. A million of them, many of not wearing masks. Nobody said a word.
Oh, yeah, of course. After all, I mean, I think didn't somebody say that because they were fighting for the right cause, it was actually more just than even the coronavirus, after all? But
and nobody, by the way, pointed to the fact that the COVID-19 was actually reducing at that point. We could have had a great summer had America open already, back to work. And after those June 1st protests, then we saw the spikes increase again.
Oh,
they hold some culpability for that.
You know something? That's a really good point. I didn't think of that, but yes, that's right. We could mention that every time they talk about some conservative seen not with a mask on or something. So the two social signings, the two executive orders, basically restore funding for abortion overseas, which in a sense we're going to impose on some conservative countries, some Muslim countries, almost a sort of an informal form of blackmail that they better allow abortions or else we're going to cut off aid. And the second one, of course, is that they are integrating girls' bathrooms and shower rooms. How do you think that's going to fly? I mean, neither of those, by the way, these are significant social events. I mean, goes to the very fabric of, American society. This is something that you would assume that the American people have a say in, through their representatives in Congress, but Congress was not consulted at all. He just shoved this through by signing orders. What do you think? How do you think that's going to manifest in terms of public opinion?
Well, look, I think it's grotesque that most big city mayors, blue city mayors, blue state governors, people like Andrew Cuomo, Gavin Newsom, and even Joe Biden himself want the American economy to still be shut down. So we can't, export products or manufacturing is slowed down. Yet we'll export abortions because that's what the United States of America wants to be known for, right? Is the killing of innocent kids. I think it just shows again that the payback was due upon arrival in Washington, D.C. This was clearly a plan hatched by Planned Parenthood, hatched by perhaps Kamala Harris and others who have been very strong allies of Planned Parenthood over her career. Look, Kamala Harris, when she was Attorney General in the state of California, actually imprisoned a filmmaker for writing.
That's right. And I think we can mention his name, Daladian.
David Daladian.
That's right.
Went to prison and had sort of a Roger Stone-like 4 a.m. raid in front of his house at the request of Kamala Harris. That's how much she was in bed with Planned Parenthood. So I think it's no mistake that you see the liberals in the White House now, paying back favors. And somebody hatched this idea around the table and said, oh, I know how to, since abortions are down and since the public opinion and the support of abortion is at the lowest point it's been now since Roe versus Wade, and it's also the lowest polling it's ever been in the youth. So Generation Z, those millennials, they don't like abortion. They actually value life. I think Planned Parenthood said, we know we have a customer base overseas. Let's use the federal government of the United States to export abortions. I mean, it's just grotesque.
So they can keep their business model moving forward.
Yeah. And in terms of the locker room stuff, I mean, look, we went from locker room talk to actual potential sexual predators in locker rooms. Sure. I mean, that is ironic. This is something I've actually been talking about since back in 2008, 12 years ago on the Prop 8 campaign over marriage in the state of California. We warned about stuff like this during the marriage versus gay marriage debate. We said, look, if you open the barn door to all this, you're going to have, transgenders and men in teenage girls' locker rooms. That's a recipe for disaster. You're also going to have, sex ed being taught to kids in kindergarten. Sure enough, that ended up happening. We started ringing the alarm bell on this a long, long time ago in the state of California, and unfortunately, it has all become true.
Yeah, and we have to be very careful when we talk about this because, well, I'll get to my next point, other than to just say that my understanding is that the whole movement started when a guy wearing a wig went into a woman's locker room at a YMCA in some city in the Midwest and stripped down, showering. There was some women there who complained about it to the front desk. They were then reprimanded for complaining. There was a lawsuit, and he won the lawsuit. And so you could say he's the Rosa Parks of women's locker rooms in a way, right?
Right.
But so let's just let's just move on. The fact that Kamala Harris, as Attorney General, had been involved with imprisoning this journalist because he had reported on something that was not favorable to one of her clients. And during the presidential debates, she openly challenged all of the other candidates on the stage to support her effort. And she was talking at the time to Elizabeth Warren, who didn't sign on, that they should ask and demand that Twitter ban President Trump and remove his account from their station because it was much too influential, much too damaging. Well, the fact is that she does seem to be, this seems to be perhaps her number one, if not one of her major causes, censorship, the expunging from the public square of opinions that might be contrary to her own. And a lot of what she did come to pass right before the inauguration. You had President Trump, which was unthinkable up until that point, removed from Twitter. He had 6 million followers, taken down completely, never to be allowed to return again. World leaders, including Angela Merkel, complained about it, said that they thought it was troubling. The president of Mexico complained. I mean, this was, it was one of the most un-American acts of censorship in our times. And then, of course, they completely destroyed Parler, which had people, conservatives and liberals, but people who had significant accounts on there, where they had hundreds of thousands of followers. Suddenly, they're now wiped from the public square. They can never be heard again. They, overnight, boom, they're gone. Now you have, I think, a bill making its way through Congress, and Biden talked about this, that he wants to go after, quote, white supremacists and other haters. It's kind of a straw dog. I mean, it's like the National Socialists talking about they want to go after Jews. They've created this enemy, and in this case, a fringe group that basically was infiltrated and rightfully by the FBI in the 1960s, the Ku Klux Klan, that is. And all of a sudden, it's being resurrected and held up for national legislation to make sure that these people are never heard from again. I get that, but it seems to me, and I feel maybe, very suspicious of this, maybe because I am a Jew and because I have studied Nazism, that you have a government now deciding who, they call anybody and everybody a white supremacist. And that, the New York Times apparently called these guys who are trying to short the GameStop white supremacists. I mean, it's that ridiculous. Anybody who's an enemy of the left and of the government is a white supremacist. And that everyone that is labeled as such, and it is a vicious lie, terrible thing to say, is going to be removed from public discourse. And I think there is a bill before Congress that will codify that. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I mean, we saw yesterday, too, federal law enforcement agencies and experts talking about how we need a counterinsurgency strategy against, conservative Americans or anyone who might be a white supremacist. Look, that's war. That's war footing. That's talk of going after American citizens with the same tactics that they went after Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. I mean, it is alarming. That's not to say there might not be a white supremacist problem, an organized problem in some areas of the country. But look, by and large, I can tell you that the most, other than the January 6th incident at the Capitol, I think the worst thing that the far right groups did is threaten to kidnap Governor Whitmer of Michigan. I mean,
right. And by the way, that was not necessarily far right either. Apparently, the main ringleader in that was the BLM and an anarchist.
Yeah,
so that's
right.
not even,
Yeah, and you compare this to the 160 days of protests and rioting that happened at the hands of Antifa. I mean, let's set BLM aside for a moment. I at least understand their plight. They feel they've had inequality for the last 35 to 135 years. I understand that. But the Antifa violence that has happened against regular citizens who have been, sitting out at restaurant cafes after being locked down for 9 months, trying to, in the case in the Pacific Northwest, Antifa sealing off the doors to high-rise buildings so that when they torched it and turned the building on fire, people would be stuck and would burn to death. I mean, those type of things I would love to hear law enforcement talk about on a grander scale. How are we going to stop those folks? They actually commandeered and took over an American city last summer.
That's right. The
Seattle.
Yeah.
I mean,
Talk about insurrectionists.
Talk about needing to stop an insurrection. How about we go after them? Instead, what law enforcement did and what federal law enforcement did, they allowed them to carve out a piece of an American city and pretend it was like some demilitarized zone, not even in the United States of America. That's a bigger concern to me.
Well, that's right. And I think I recall the mayor of Seattle, Durkin, saying, "Oh, this is like the summer of love." So, and
I think she got proven wrong on that. Look, when 14-year-old boy died there at the Chaz Chop Zone, and so many people in Seattle who are liberals even grew tired of, having spray paint all over their businesses and not being able to travel back and forth. And what ended up happening and what ended up really being the death knell there is the Chaz Chop activists themselves ended up becoming corrupt. So they called Donald Trump corrupt, but then by the end of it, they were like charging people to go a block and get to their business or get to their apartment building. I mean, it just shows that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes, indeed. And so here we are, we have the U.S. Capitol cordoned off. It's almost like a red zone in Baghdad. I mean, I have this, I'm on TikTok, and I follow this TikToker who lives in Washington, and he goes out filming every day and showing concertina wire and military trucks moving up the street. It looks like Baghdad over there. And I think that they still have deployed, I believe, 6,000 National Guardsmen in Washington. And there was, he's filming instances that are happening where all of a sudden military trucks are pulling up. And this is right in the heart of the city. The media is not reporting on this. I haven't seen anything about this on NBC or any of the major networks. Do you have any information about that, Jennifer?
This is really the most frightening and shocking story, I think, of Joe Biden's inauguration. You can understand, they had to protect the capital city on Inauguration Day from protesters. But think about this, the double standard and hypocrisy. Remember back in the mid-2000s at the height of the Iraq War, remember how Cindy Sheehan and other anti-war protesters, they were so mad when the Department of Justice made them, stay in a certain area to protest and they couldn't get close to the president. Well, in this case, I really do believe that this extension of the National Guard protection is not just there to protect the Capitol and some of our institutions, but it's really there to sort of tamp down these protests. They don't want Joe Biden to be seen as being a president who's being protested. They want the American people not to have that visual of protests in D.C. This is really frightening, especially from a group of people who 15 years ago were saying that, they should be able to protest wherever they want, whether it's outside of George W. Bush's Crawford Ranch or it's right down the street from the White House. The fact is, this fits with their whole narrative of trying to squelch free speech, because we do know that protest is a version of free speech. It's protected in the Constitution under the First Amendment. I think this is one of the underreported story of the year so far.
I mean, yes, and it seems to me that the Capitol building can be secured without 6,000 National Guardsmen and concertina wire. In fact, I wonder why it wasn't secured on January 6th when you had the guy with the buffalo horns and the painted face simply walking around taking selfies with the police. I mean, it just, it's a very strange phenomena. And of course, what that did was it interrupted the attempt by 7 states to contest the election in their states. So now anybody connected to that is being called a terrorist, an insurrectionist. Anybody who questions the election, terrorist, insurrectionist. And the atmosphere
and where was the National Guard last year? Where was the National Guard for 109 days when Joe Biden didn't condemn the riots? When Joe Biden didn't condemn the Antifa violence?
Oh, he denied they even exist. I think during the debate he said there is no such thing as Antifa. It's just an idea.
And in fact, the D.C. mayor, Muriel Bowser, sent them home. She said they weren't welcome in the capital city. So it's interesting how, the American people had to watch this violence play out last year. They had to watch our statues and our federal buildings deface the ones that we pay for and the ones that represent our heritage in this country, whether it's negative or positive heritage, it's a part of our country. And we had to watch that happen. And the National Guard wasn't present for that, but they're present so that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer can run the halls freely of the U.S. Capitol. And that seems a bit imbalanced to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, they can secure the U.S. Capitol reasonably. I mean, I had to renew my passport here in Boston, where I am. So I went to the Tip O'Neill building, which is the major federal building in the city. And just to get in, I mean, I had to take off my belt and I had to put all my stuff in a basket and then they had to do a wand and everything. I mean, and that's not for a major federal building either. I mean, the U.S. Capitol is the most important federal building in the country. And it just seems to me that it wouldn't take much to just do a simple job of keeping people out. I mean, the guy with the buffalo horns would not be able to breach a reasonable, I mean, thing that would have him go in. So I hope that the FBI is doing an investigation. I hope there are enough honest FBI agents, and I think there are, to actually get to the bottom of what happened on that day, because to my way of thinking, politically, it's being used in the same way that the German National Socialists used the Reichstag fire. Not as bad. I'm not saying that, but we should call from history that 4 weeks after Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany, somebody burned down the Reichstag. There's always been some conspiracy theories about that. That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The point is it was used as a pretext for the Nazi regime to cancel the Constitution and the Reichstag. That's not happening here, and I'm not saying it is, at least not in the de facto sense, although we certainly have a president who's ignoring Congress. But it is being used, I would suggest, to demonize and marginalize anyone that opposes this regime or this government, and to censor people. That, I would suggest, that seems quite clear by evidence.
Yeah, look, I think you're right to look back at history. What we know about Democrats, and especially liberals and progressives, is we do know that they take pages from history. And I think a lot of the squelching of free speech we're seeing right now, a lot of the cancel culture we're seeing right now, has been lifted also from a page in history, and that's the Chinese Cultural Revolution that happened between the years 1965 and 1975. What's going on in this country is actually very similar. The Chinese sort of gave it a fancy name, the Cultural Revolution, but there was anything but culture allowed there. And I have friends from New York City that, born and raised in Beijing, their parents went through this. They said it was the most frightening period of time that they survived. They had friends that were professors who literally disappeared into thin air. And this was a very frightening time. If you look at what their first act was of the 1965 Cultural Revolution in China, where they were trying to cleanse the culture of any dissenting opinion against the Chinese Communist Party, they took the kids out of school. They took the kids out of school because they knew if they could sort of dumb down the kids, keep the parents busy with having to care for the kids during the day, they knew that they could get a leg up on people, that people would be worried about other things. And it reminds me of the COVID-19 crisis. What's the first thing that happened in the COVID-19 crisis? They took the kids out of school. And in some areas like Los Angeles Unified School District and New York City, those kids for the majority of the last 10 months have not been in school. And I have a focus group of moms across the country that I keep in touch with regularly because I'm always tracking the women vote and what the pressing issues are. They say our kids, because they're not in school, they're being indoctrinated by TikTok because their kids are on the phone all day. Guess who owns TikTok? The Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah. And plus, TikTok is gathering information too, by the way.
Oh, 100%. And if you look at TikTok, they say there's everything's against Trump. It's pro-BLM. It's pro-Antifa. These kids are getting indoctrinated by this while they're not in school. Granted, the parents have some responsibility, but this is by and large what I'm hearing across the country. You also look at the, American businesses that still aren't reopened, and many places like Los Angeles and New York City, those towns are deader than a doornail. And that's also what happened during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, is they prevented people from being able to earn their own paycheck. They had to be dependent on daddy government, and therefore then you can't speak out against the government either.
Right. Although it does seem like the mayor of Chicago and the governor of New York and some of the more blue areas, frankly, are trying to reopen, I think, now that Biden is safely installed in office, because they want to get the economy working again. They've, in a way, politically, and I was saying medically, but politically speaking, the pandemic has already served its purpose. Trump has been defeated. Yeah. Anyway, Jennifer Kearns, you're the host of the new nationally syndicated show, All American Radio with Jennifer Kearns. Jennifer, let my listeners and viewers know how they can hear your program and any websites you'd like to share.
Sure. We're on Los Angeles, 790 KABC, the flagship station of Larry Elder and Sean Hannity for many years. We're also in Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, California, Memphis, Tennessee, Denver, Colorado Springs on Salem Radio. They can check us out at allamericannews.com. They can listen to radio shows there. We also have original content, news, opinion, allamericannews.com. And it's been great to be with you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer Kearns. I really appreciate it. All right. And we'll do it again soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
And all right, we are still on the air on all of my various stations here. So I'm going to, I want to read an article that was actually written by Jeff Kuhner, who is someone that he's on WRKO, and he really does a great job. I really admire Jeff. He kind of nails it. Let me just go here. I'm just going live on YouTube. I mean, apparently for Jennifer, I didn't do the visual live. I only got the audio live, which is too bad because, frankly, she's a pretty nice looking woman. But we have. I still have it. I mean, I really need. I really need to get my act together in terms of doing this. Sometimes there's so many buttons to push that I don't always get the right button. So I apologize for that. But anyway, I want to read Jeff's article. He posted it on the WRKO website. Liberal totalitarianism. Democrats seek to criminalize Trump supporters. Now, let me just preface this by noting that right after President Trump was elected in 2016, Massachusetts attorney, and I'm in Massachusetts, Jeff is as well, WRKO, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey created a hotline for people to drop a dime on Trump supporters. And it lasted for a few days. There was such an outcry over it. It was so outrageous and so ridiculous that she took it down. Well, maybe she took it down, but the sentiment remained and the phenomena continues. And I think that Jeff lays this out in his article, which was published today at the WRKO website. You could go there and just put in Jeff Kuhner, Kuhn as in Nancy, ER. And I'm going to read it. And then maybe we'll take some calls. Liberal totalitarianism, Democrats seek to criminalize Trump supporters. The enemy is within, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi thundered. This is what many leading Democrats and liberals now believe. And who exactly are these enemies? You guessed it, Trump supporters and conservatives. Radical Democrats are planning to wage a domestic war on terrorism, turning nearly half the country into potential political terrorists. If this sounds like an exaggeration, simply check out House Resolution 350, the liberals' equivalent of the Patriot Act Redux. This time, however, it is not aimed at Islamic jihadists. Rather, it directly targets Trump patriots. The storming of the Capitol building on January 6 has been cynically and dangerously exploited by the left to tar all Trump's voters as, quote, domestic terrorists, unquote, insurrectionists, seditionists, traitors, and of course, white supremacists. H.R. 350 has the full backing of the Democratic congressional leadership, the Biden administration, including Dementia Joe himself, big media, and big tech. If the bill is passed, then the United States will become a police state. The proposed law urges an internal war on domestic extremists, quote unquote, similar to the war on Al-Qaeda and Islamists following the 9/11 terrorist attack. It calls for U.S. intelligence agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI to target Trump conservatives, especially those who believe the 2020 election was stolen and Biden is an illegitimate president. The bill empowers the deep state to monitor, surveil, and spy on American citizens' social media accounts, phone calls, political meetings, and even infiltrate pro-Trump or stop the steal rallies. Conservatives who are deemed potentially seditious or treasonous can be arrested and jailed, fined and or lose their employment. The goal is simple: to crush all dissent to the Biden regime. What is shocking is how angry and bloodthirsty for revenge the Democrats are. Think about it. They control the White House and both chambers of Congress. Yet instead of celebrating and trying to pass their progressive agenda, they are hell-bent on destroying Trump and his supporters. Former CIA Director John Brennan insists that in the wake of the Capitol riot, Trump voters pose an existential threat to American democracy. Hence, this is why the country needs a Patriot Act 2.0. This time, however, directly going after American and America First conservatives. And this threat from domestic violence, quote, and this threat from domestic violence extremists is much more challenging, I believe, than it was in terms of going after foreign terrorists, Brennan said on CNN. The domestic violent extremists are much more pervasive. Their numbers are much larger. Unlike Al-Qaeda, for example, Brennan believes there are tens of millions of domestic terrorists here in the United States, in particular, those who oppose Joe Biden and legally own guns, have the weapons, quote, have the weapons that if they choose to use them, they can in fact carry out these deadly attacks, unquote. Brennan may be stupid and a political thug, but he speaks for many in our ruling class. According to their twisted, unhinged worldview, Trump supporters who champion the Second Amendment are enemies of the state. There are many others on the left who share this pathological hatred of conservatives and Republicans. Take Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the darling of progressive Democrats. She not only backs H.R. 350, the Marxist Latina wants congressional Republicans put on a terrorist watch list. Why? Because she believes GOP leaders, such as House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, are neo-Nazi white supremacists who secretly want to murder Democrats, including her. There are legitimate white supremacist sympathizers that sit at the heart and at the core of the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, Ocasio-Cortez said in an interview on MSNBC. There's no consequences for racism, no consequences for messaging, no consequences for insurrection, and no consequences means that they condone it. She added, "We are now away from acting out of fealty to the president that they had in the Oval Office, and now we are talking about fealty to white supremacist organizations as a political tool." Notice AOC didn't point to any specific white supremacist group the GOP allegedly supports. This is because there isn't any. AOC and her fellow anti-Trump leftists are peddling insane hatred as a fantasy, a dark fantasy. But the left is now in power, and liberals are laying the groundwork for a progressive, authoritarian regime. Eugene Robinson, a leading columnist for the Washington Post, recently said on MSNBC that there are millions of Americans, almost all white, almost all Republicans, who somehow need to be deprogrammed, quote unquote. For good measure, Robinson said, it's as if they are members of a cult, the Trumpist cult, and they have to be deprogrammed, unquote. This orgy of hate and intolerance is being repeated like a drumbeat from the New York Times to the Washington Post to CNN and MSNBC to Hollywood and Silicon Valley to corporate America and Wall Street to universities and Ivy League colleges and ultimately the Democratic Party. In short, by the commanding heights of culture want to suppress, censor, and ban conservatives who dare to challenge liberal orthodoxy. They are deliberately dehumanizing and delegitimizing an entire class of people based on their political beliefs. They are engaging in the most sweeping and brazen assault on the civil liberties in American history. And the reason is obvious. The Democrats are petrified of the truth, and the truth is that they, aided and abetted by the fake news media and big tech oligarchs, committed rampant voter fraud to steal the election from Donald Trump. This is why they fear and loathe Trump supporters. The Biden regime is based on electoral theft and a pack of lies. It is illegitimate to its core. This is why the ruling class needs and wants to criminalize conservatives and any form of dissent. Having attained power fraudulently, the regime must lash out at its opponents in a desperate attempt to silence, bully, and intimidate them. Declaring war on your own population and political enemies is not only despicable and grotesque, it is dangerous and totalitarian. This new domestic war on terrorism will tear the fabric of our country apart. It must be stopped immediately. Biden may have promised unity. Instead, he may give us the very opposite. So, that is Jeff Kuhner's fantastic column Liberal totalitarianism Democrats seek to criminalize Trump supporters. The reference here is to House Resolution 350. We ought to keep an eye on that. I call on good, well-meaning conservatives and liberals to reject this. This is not becoming a free society. This is not American. Anyway, I'm going to have, I've got two other guests coming on the program, one of whom is a Canadian educator who has written an illustrated book for children on the George Floyd murder as a way to heighten awareness of racism. I may not agree with some of her conclusions, but we're going to talk about that type of education in schools. You know, I think it's safe to say she's coming at this from the left, and my intention is to conduct an interesting and respectful dialogue with this author. She's coming on with me live at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to join for one quick phone call here, 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. What is on your mind this afternoon? You're welcome to join me. I just read this very powerful essay by Jeffrey Kuhner, who is a talk show host on WRKO. Hope to have him actually join me on this program to talk about it. And when I say that, and as I read that column, I have to tell you, I am concerned that I am going to be yanked off the air any minute. Already, I was notified yesterday that YouTube has demonetized my channel. That hurts, but, you know, that's what the world we're in. Hello, you're on the air. Thank you for joining me. Hello.
Hey, Chuck, it's Paul. How are you?
Hi, Paul. How you doing?
That was a great article you just read.
Yes.
My big question is this. Now that you've read that, do you still support the Biden administration as you said you were earlier, or do you feel that now that you have a better understanding that it's almost a war against conservatives, which is really nationalism?
Well, first of all, I never supported the Biden administration. I simply recognized that when Biden and Harris were inaugurated, he is the president of the United States and Harris is the vice president of the United States. That doesn't mean that I support them. I don't.
I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Support, I don't mean support. I meant recognize. Do you still
yes,
recognize?
I do recognize. Yes, I do. Because
can you explain that specifically? Because I'm confused.
Sure. Because our system requires that every 4 years we inaugurate a new administration, or if one is reelected, even then it's still a new administration. And on January 20th at 12 noon, that was the administration that was inaugurated. However it happened, and I do question the means, it happened. So I recognize that because I believe, I'm not an anarchist. I believe that we have a system. Now, once that has happened, I certainly will, and I have done everything that is at my disposal to try to call it into question, to try to, to make sure this doesn't happen again, to oppose it in every way I can when they're wrong. And that seems to be in most cases, not all. But they are the government. He is the president. Yeah, I recognize that.
Okay, so here's my first question. What would have to happen in order for you not to continue to recognize this administration? Camps, or what level would this have to get to in order for you to say, okay, I can't respect it anymore. This isn't an administration. This isn't the Constitution and everything that goes along with that. What would have to happen? Because it seems to me that It's pretty bad. So what
would have to happen is that the administration would have had to have performed an act that was unconstitutional to the point at which they would be brought up on articles of impeachment. They would be impeached. They would be convicted, and they would be removed from office. That's how our system works. The Constitution has in place a process by which an administration and a president can be impeached. So what would have to happen is the president would have to be impeached.
So let's say that the Congress is controlled by the House and the Senate as it is, and they're doing things. The president is doing things where in any normal situation he would be impeached, but the Democrats are sort of, these globalist Democrats are sort of behind him. So you're saying that there's no, so if 50.
Yeah. Are you there, Paul? Okay, we seem to have lost Paul. Look, what I would say is that I support the system as it exists, and I believe that the system provides for articles of impeachment if a president, or for that matter, if a judge, or if anyone engages in articles that would warrant that, high crimes and misdemeanors, treason, other articles that are in the Constitution. And I guess that Paul was asking that if such articles were prevented by enough people in Congress who supported this, well, at that point, I hope and pray we don't come to that, but something, we very well might. I don't know quite how to answer that. Hello, you're on the air. Hello. Thank you for calling. Speak up when you're ready. All right, we just lost them. I don't know what's going on. Am I having a problem with my Skype? I don't know. Who knows? Let's try it again. Hello, you're on the air. Yes, thank you for calling.
I'm sorry, Chuck, I got disconnected. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay, Paul. Anyway, to answer your question, that's a good question. There's no easy answer. You're saying that if there were enough people in the House and the Senate that would refuse to impeach a president who had been involved in high crimes and misdemeanors, what do we do?
Correct.
And, I don't know. At that point, maybe we do have to take, extraordinary measures as a people. At that point, it does raise the question of whether or not we are still a self-governing people. It would be very troubling. I hope we don't get to that. I could see that we very well might. I just don't know how to answer that question. I'm all about the law, and I want to see, the Constitution observed. So I don't want to be hypocritical about that. But I guess you're saying if there are enough of our elected officials who are going to abrogate the Constitution, what do we do? That's a tough question to answer. I don't have an answer.
Do you think we're there already?
No.
Do you think with speech and, oh, really? You don't think we're there already?
Not quite, but we're moving in that direction. Right now, look, the way fascism works, and I'm going to be releasing another short book on this topic. Hopefully by next week. I'm doing like a series of short books. This one
You're like Stephen King. You're like Stephen King, Chuck. You're spitting them out every week.
Oh, well, I'm trying to do it. My goal is to do these short, kind of like almost pamphlets, no more than 10,000 words. My first one is called "We Are All Socialists Now: A Deplorable Looks at the 2020 Election." This new one is going to be called "Toward Nazi America," in which I talk about what's happening in this administration. So, I'm trying to stay abreast of it. I'm trying to stay on top of it. I do believe that we're moving in that direction. And, it hasn't actually happened yet. The way fascism works, whether it be Nazi or Italian fascism, is that the government oligarchs, usually headed up by either a strongman dictator or by like a group of like a junta, works in hand in glove with select corporations, and they kind of run the show. The select corporations get monopoly powers in exchange for protection from the government, which they also protect. It's kind of a collusion. And in Italy, this was formalized in that the Mussolini had what's called a council of corporations, as opposed to a parliament or a Congress. This also happened in Nazi Germany after the Reichstag fire, when the Nazis suspended the Reichstag and they replaced it with select corporations like Krupp and others and IG Farben, and they kind of ran the government. Is that what's happening in this country? I would argue that we are moving in that direction, that one of the reasons why big tech was able to take down Parler and censor President Trump and remove him from Twitter is because they knew that the new incoming Biden administration wouldn't stop them from doing that there would be no Congress that would stop them from doing it. And that gets very close to a fascist-style collusion between certain select private corporations and government oligarchs. So, yeah, I think we are moving in that direction.
Do you think nation states even exist anymore? Do you think that? Do you feel there's even a United States anymore? Do you feel that? Don't you feel the world is a college of corporations, as Ned Beatty keenly said in the movie Network in 1979? That it's that. I mean, what is a nation? I mean, do we even have a nation? I mean, who owns our assets? Who owns our forest land? Who owns our resources? I mean, I don't know if you ever read Chomsky's Understanding Power, and there's a lot of things I don't like Chomsky, what he says, but there's a lot of good things he says. He says the idea of the United States, to even call it a country anymore, between the corporations that own everything and the people that own assets. I mean, is there even a United States anymore, Chuck?
Yes, I think there is still a United States. I think that there is a war.
What is it? What is the United States?
Well, the United States
besides a colonized population, what is it?
The United States is people like you and I, and it's sovereign citizens under God. It is enough people who still are conscious and awake and are aware of what freedom is, and they're at war against us. You know, you have a combination of domestic and international corporations and domestic and international oligarchies that have really taken the high ground of power, particularly since, I mean, I mark the demarcation date as the election of 1912 and the election of Wilson, who was the first openly socialist president. At that year, you had direct taxation. You had the Senate would be directly elected, which made them represent the federal government. You had the Federal Reserve Act, so that therefore you had a cartel of private bankers deciding the value of our currency as opposed to Congress. You had a bunch of other things that moved us in the direction of, plus you had World War I, which was a whole interesting subject. You know, we began to see a process by which powers of government were transferred from elected officials who were responsible to their electorate to unelected officials, bureaucracies, judges, international organizations like NGOs and the United Nations, the WTO, you know, the WHO, all of these international groups that suddenly took on governing powers. And that also happened on the state level and even on the local level. And so, yeah, we're at war against that. But they don't control everything. We still have sovereignty under God. It is still one of these underlying internecine struggles. We're doing it right now. No, I don't think, I think there still is a United States. I think that this election is a very dangerous one in that it represents not only a return to this international order where we're involved in perpetual war and interlocking directorates with other nations, but we still, you know, we're still here. We still have the right to function. We still have the Constitution. We just need to learn. We have to learn how to use it. We have to learn how to employ it and talk about it.
Did you see Klaus Schwab's been giving speeches lately on how there's going to be massive blackouts coming soon? It's going to be some kind of cyber attack, which, you know, God knows where that's going to be coming from. I think things are going to be, I think more strains of coronavirus are going to be coming out. I think blackouts are going to be coming out. I think there's going to be some very scary times ahead, Chuck. What do you think?
I agree. In fact, my guest just now, Jennifer Kearns, I don't know if you heard any of that, but
I didn't.
Okay, but she talked about,
I'll listen later.
Yeah, she talked about one of the executive orders that Biden signed in his first day in office, which basically means that the United States is rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement. One of the little codicils to that agreement is that the American power grid is now open for foreign involvement and investment, which means China. And there are some other little pieces of information salted into that executive order that are very troubling. Now, you're talking about the Great Reset. I think that the conference that they held in Davos earlier this year, where Schwab was one of the major architects, that was briefly online. It went viral, and then they deleted it. And
I saw that.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, I had Jay Dyer on the show talk about that, and he's an expert on that. And it's where they are. I mean, it's the new warmed over version of international socialism. I mean, there's no question about that. We're dealing with it, and the fact that you're saying that they're going to be introducing new strains of, or there will be new strains of coronavirus and blackouts. I don't doubt that. I mean, there already are new strains. They're already talking about that.
Chuck, I'm almost 50. I know you're a little bit older than I am. Don't you feel sorry for these kids today who don't get to see the world that we grew up in? It's so sad.
It is a big problem. I can speak to this, personally, some people in my own life. It's like they don't know what the hell is going on. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's so, they have captured education and they've captured the media and the means of communication so thoroughly, and they have used it as a conveyor belt for left-wing propaganda. And, I mean, everything now is being censored. I mean, some of my books, I've written over 15 nonfiction books. And when I started writing, really around, 2010, 2011, things were a little more free, and Wikipedia back then was a little bit more reliable, and I could find information that I wanted to get. Now you can't. Everything has been taken down. I mean, you look at Wikipedia, it's completely, propaganda. It's totally, you can't find anything anymore. It's all on the left. It's all like disappeared down a gigantic vortex. And it's very frightening. And when I look at it now, as I try to continue with my writing, I can see that it's gotten really difficult to get things out. So, it's very troubling.
Yeah, I live in New England too, Chuck. I live in the Connecticut shoreline. And all my nieces and nephews, they tell me they're in high school how there's literally cultural Marxism in every single class. This and that. It's insane.
Oh, it's permeated everything. And everything now, one of the manifestations of it is that everybody is focused on race identity, and that everything comes down to that. And it's all that anyone who is not white is oppressed. And, it's an extremely negative view. A really skewed perspective. It doesn't recognize, that there are great opportunities for everyone right now, particularly, I would suggest, people of color who are achievers. That this isn't this negative anti-American view. And I think that a lot of this is being rigged up as a way of denouncing this country.
Divide and conquer, Chuck, the only trick in the book.
All right, Paul, listen, thanks for calling.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So I'm going to wrap it up at this point, and thank you all for joining me.